What's up, pretty gang? It's your favorite nail tech Peaches, back with another video, and today I have a interesting video for you guys. It's going to be extremely helpful, beginner friendly. It'll be for advanced nail techs, everyone. We are talking about liquid to powder ratios, and we are going to be discussing beads, wrong beads, right beads, okay beads, all of that good stuff. So I am getting ready to go to Arizona tonight, so I'm going to pre-record videos so I can just have them posted for the holiday week. So that'll be exciting. Make sure you're subscribed and notified for all of that. Follow me on social media so you don't miss out. Join my broadcast channel on Instagram as well. And y'all already know, coupon codes, Amazon storefront is in the description below. And follow my personal page if you want to see what I'm up to this following week. So first things first, this is what my client came in with. I just wanted to show you before. That is 4 weeks old. We soaked her off. She is ready for her new set. Listen, healthy soak offs. Her nails are beautiful and I'm so happy. So before we get into everything, I want to show you guys what is my preference. So my preference of beads, as you can see, I don't use a ton of liquid, but I prefer my beads to be wet with just a little bit of powder around the rim. Now what this does is cause me to have a lot of substance to my bead. As you can see, they're protruding really well from the side. You don't want something that's too flat. Obviously some things are going to be wetter or drier depending on what you're looking for, but these are different size beads and you can see they are pretty consistent no matter what I do. So you'll just want to get to a point, this is what we're going to focus on, getting to a point to where all of your beads are consistent and you know what beads are for what, how, when, why, all of that. So really quickly, I just want to show you guys. So this bead is too dry, and also when you notice the way I dragged my brush, it's very flat. It takes up more of the body of the brush. That's not what we want. We want to go ahead and kind of tap in the powder once we get the right liquid. You want a bead that kind of protrudes on the tip, but not takes over the body of the brush. As you can see, this was a beautiful bead. So I'm going to show you guys what is different types of beads and how I would classify them. So I would say this bead is just right. You can see once again, although it is a little bit on the wetter side, it still protrudes really nicely. You get a good amount of powder to liquid ratio. This one is also considered just right. Although it is a little bit more drier, that one is more so of my preference, right? And even this last one is just right. Even though it is a little bit drier than both of them, it still can be used. As you can see, they're pretty consistent to what I've already laid down. Now this one is wrong. This is way too dry. As you can see, there's not really a lot of polymerization going on. It's very flat. It causes it to be very small because there's not enough liquid to powder. There's more powder than it is liquid. So we obviously can see this is way too wet. You never want to dip your brush in the powder and not drain your brush on the side of your adapting dish. So you guys can see, we know what a wet bead is, but this is just too wet. It's not going to dry very fast at all. You guys see, once I lay it down, it completely flattens out, and as I'm touching it, it's just completely dry. I mean, completely flat. It's going to take forever to dry, and that's not what you want. So equally, this one is too dry. Again, we have a flat bead. There is no sheen to it at all. It's pretty much all powder, and you guys can see too wet and too dry sometimes give you the same type of look. Now let's look at one that's just right. This is on the wetter side, but again, you have that tiny little rim of powder, which is gonna polymerize, and you guys can see right in front of our eyes. If we let it set, it is gonna dry more, and it is gonna give us some nice substance, all right? Now we're gonna look at another bead that is just right, but this one's on the drier side. So just right, you guys can see a little bit more powder peeking through, but as you let it set, you guys can see the way the liquid kind of absorbs into the powder. It's called polymerization. It's to come together in basically what we call acrylic, right? They're pretty consistent. So you guys can see the too dry and too wet look similar, and the too wet, the just right wet and the just right dry look consistent. So we want to focus on, hey, which one of these actually works best for me? When I'm doing ombres, I suggest something that is a little more on the wetter side, but not completely wet. And when we're doing basic sets, you want something that's a little bit more on the drier side so you can keep your substance. Once all of these dry down, you can really see the difference. So this is the color we're using. It's going to be California Love. You already know it's not polished. It's not nothing. So I'm going to show you a variation of each bead I used to do this set. I did them all differently. This is why it's taking longer to do this basic colored set. But I really want to show you guys what are the differences that go on between beads, and maybe it can help you out. So you guys can see this is too dry. There's too much powder peeking through. It is a nice size because we're working on the pinky nail. I know some people like 1 beads, 2 beads, 3. Nonetheless, too dry. Now this one is still a good size bead, but too wet, because once I lay this on the nail, it will go everywhere, or you'll have to drain it out a lot. So keep in mind that is a usable bead, but I wouldn't recommend it if you're a beginner. Now this one, you see the difference? It's a good size. It's just right. We have the sheen to it with, you see there's a little bit of dryness to it. Now, a little bit of dryness is fine because it's going to polymerize and it's going to soak up the liquid. And as you guys can see, as I'm moving it around and it's kind of setting itself up, it becomes just right. Now, if your beads are completely wet, I know some people refer to that as like, oh man, this acrylic moves like butter. That consistency of like, oh, this is so buttery. I typically notice people who say that, they like to work with their acrylic a lot wetter. Also, keep in mind, the wetter your bead, the less substance you have, which if you have a lot of nails that break all the time, even your basic sets, it might be because your beads are a little bit too wet. So you're not realizing when beads are wet, the product doesn't stay in place. Everything moves around a lot. It doesn't solidify the same. And basically you'll have weakness to the nail or weak spots, you see? So with that one bead, you can see the pinky nail, the structure is built and everything. So with this bead, this is too wet and it's the wrong size. So as you guys can see, not only was it too wet, but the size of it is not going to allow me to really do much. And if I continue working with this bead while my brush is also wet, because if your brush stays wet, too wet, it's going to inject more liquid into that bead, right? You guys can see it's not really going to do anything. Now this one, for what we need, is just right, and it's a good size bead, because now we have to add more to what was already there because it's not going to cover. So even though that bead looked a little bit drier, it's still just right, because for this instance, if we put another wet bead, everything's going to be everywhere. So if you have a bead that's too wet, you can always grab more powder like with that bead, or you can lay it down and quickly grab a bead that's a little bit drier, so that way the previous wet bead can absorb the new powder, if that makes sense. So once you guys see, I fixed my ratio by adding a drier bead to one that was too wet, and now pretty much things are as normal. You have to be able to problem solve, which is why I always say, look, learn liquid to powder ratios, learn your beads, learn your preferences. It's gonna help, right? So again, we're tapping in the powder. This is just right, and it's a good size, because now we need to do the apex area. So you guys can see, although a lot of what I'm saying is just right or my own preferences, I am just showing you how I come to these conclusions. And as you guys can see with my work, these type of beads that I'm labeling as just right are typically beads that are not going to slide around. They're still malleable and moldable with your brush, but they are not running all around. But they are wet enough that I have ample time to get done what I need to do. I do want to mention that my size brush is a size 20, which is why I'm not focusing too much on going into detail about size of beads, because that's going to be relevant to your brush. The smaller the brush, the less liquid you hold, which means the less powder you can pick up, which will affect your ratio, so keep that in mind. The bigger your brush, the more liquid, but that can also lead to wetter beads, but also bigger beads, you know? So you just kind of have to find your balance. So you can see every time I dip in, I need to wipe off on the side of the dapping dish. Now this one, although I wiped correctly, I picked up way too much powder. Even though it's a good size, it's too dry. And you're gonna see, as I lay this down, there's no way this bead is even usable. There are times where even though the bead is not perfect, I can still use it. A bead that's too wet, I can drain it out, or I can pick up more powder. But a bead that's too dry, once you have it and it's not gonna be able to fit, you're not going to be able to fix it too much. So again, let me try again. The size, good. This bead texture is great. You see how I consistently like to pick up beads that they stick to the tip of my brush, like the first third of my brush, and I'm able to lay the bead down. My brush comes right off. That's what you want. If your brush is sticking too much, it could be a dirty brush, but also it could just be you don't have enough liquid, okay? And if you take your brush away and the beads are running all over the place, you have too much liquid, okay? So again, once we kind of have the right size and the right texture to our bead with the liquid to powder ratio, things you can see are working out way better. I would highly suggest that if you're struggling with your powder to liquid ratios, again, try a different shaped brush. I get my brushes from the nail supply. I don't have anything other than that. There's not a name. I personally like when they press my brushes and it gives me a little bit more square on the tip. If you have a rounded tip brush or more pointier brush, I would suggest you trying a different shape, because it also holds liquid differently. So again, this bead is just right. The size is okay. It's a little bigger than what I need, and you'll be able to see me remove some of the product, which is fine. You see, I removed some, but because the bead is still the right liquid to powder ratio, it's not a big deal that I have to move some of the product away. another part of having a really good ratio is, as you guys can see, there's nothing that's getting dry too quickly in other places than others. It gives you a good consistent bead, which means when it's time to remove product or swipe things down, I'm able to do so without lumps and bumps, and I'm just kind of able to worry about building my nail. A lot of you guys have been asking me if I have videos on liquid to powder ratios. I do have another one, but I feel like this one is way more in depth, even though that one was too. This one's longer and more in depth, so I'm hoping this helps you a lot. I believe this next bead, we're gonna go ahead with another just right bead. You guys can see, good size, just right. Now, when I refer to a good size, it just depends on the technique you're gonna use. So as you guys can see, I'm gonna do a one bead method, and when I lay down that bead that had a little bit of dryness around the edges, as soon as I laid it down, you see that dryness is immediately absorbed, which means polymerization has taken place, or it's starting to take place, because the powder and liquid are like basically absorbing each other. There's a heat reaction. This is all chemicals, so they heat up and it hardens, right? Which is how we get acrylic nails. So just be aware that everything you do matters. If this bead was too dry, let's say it was too dry, but not dry enough that it crumbles, just dry enough that it's not moving well, then I would suggest wet your brush a little bit and add a little bit of liquid. But sometimes it will be too late, and it's best in that case to go ahead and just remove the bead. You want beads that you are in control of your beads, okay? You should not be chasing no beads around. So if you are chasing your beads and it is hard to get that good shape and hard to get that look you're going after, that means your beads are too wet, and you need to go ahead and dry them out a little bit more, or just straight up practice how to get a little bit of a drier bead. See what I'm saying? Because then once you have control over your beads, you'll be able to do different techniques to get different looks. Okay, so this next bead, right, we're gonna have a bead that's too dry. You see, I'm really trying to remove a lot of liquid out of my brush. The more liquid you remove, also the smaller bead you're gonna get. So not only is this too dry, but it's too small. I can use it, which I'm going to use it, but I already know, hey, this is not the size I want, because I would like to do this nail in the least beads as possible. Now, if this was an ombre and that bead was a little wetter, that bead would have been just fine. So as I said, some stuff is workable. I can work with it, but you see how much more of a struggle it is? I'm trying to wet this bead to keep it from being too dry, but it's already taking an effect, which is making it difficult to bring down. Okay, so I'm gonna have to go in with another bead and make sure I give their strength to the tip area and where the natural nail meets, because if I decide to just go ahead and put an apex bead and not carry anything down, then my nail will have no strength. So really take a look at what it is that you're doing. So you see this bead I'm picking up, this bead is just right and it's a good size. Although it might seem big to put in the apex area, remember the bead I laid at the tip, it was too dry and too small. So now I have to go in and make up for that. So when you think about everything, think about, okay, what size bead am I using? Is this too wet or too dry? When I lay this bead down, what happens? Is this a difficult bead to work with? Because half of the battle is recognizing, what do I need to do next? What comes next? You see what I'm saying? So it's not as it becomes less difficult once you realize how to problem solve, and once you actually break down nails to the core basic level, which is why I say enroll in nail school. I mean, everyone's programs are different. My program, I'm in California, so our rules are stricter than most states, but these are the type of things that you can learn in nail school. I understand everyone bashes it and it's kind of like, oh, you don't learn nothing. It's not there to teach you how to ombre and do French and all that stuff, because you know what? Things like that change over time. It's there so you can learn the foundation and basics. I'm not going to beat a dead horse. You guys already know I'm pro nail school. I'm pro go get your license, because I have my license. But things like this is why I'm able to think in my brain and critically think deeply about how do things work. And if I'm not getting the result I'm getting, okay, hey, let me think back and see how I can tweak something. You always got to keep that in mind. Things like this always have to be tweaked. And sometimes over time, your style changes, the way you work changes, all of that. So this is the application. As you can see, although we use different types of beads, we were able to still get the same look that we're looking for, because I knew how to make up for beads that were wrong and how to be consistent in the beads that were right. So I'm hoping you guys enjoyed this video. Of course, don't forget to subscribe. I will have a lot of videos coming this week as I'm off, okay? And then I'll see you in the next one.